the two sites or retrieval of the crashed material from the second crash site 40 miles north of Roswell. Indeed, the only information released regarding the second crash site was that it had been witnessed by Col Blanchard. It was not known to other Roswell Army Airfield officers prior to the July 8 staff meeting. It would have been expected that, given its proximity and resources, Roswell Army Airfield would play a prominent role in retrieval operations at the second site. This lack of involvement suggests that security and retrieval operations at the more sensitive second crash site were being supervised at a higher level than the general staff at Roswell Army Airfield. The most plausible explanation is that the Pentagon had deployed its own specialist teams for controlling security and retrieval operations at the more sensitive second site. Roswell Army Airfield would supply manpower, resources, and throw the public off the trail by issuing contradictory press releases. Evidence suggests that the investigatory team was a highly specialized cover team mentioned in a leaked classified document I will shortly discuss. Overwhelming first-hand witness testimony of events at Roswell, including the primary military officials involved in reporting and covering up key facts, strongly suggests that a flying saucer had indeed crashed. The Earth was being visited by interplanetary visitors, and the Pentagon had ordered a cover-up at the highest levels. Who were Ramey's bosses at the Pentagon that gave orders for the cover-up, and what was the name of the specialist recovery team? Leaked classified documents, while controversial, give plausible answers to these questions. They reveal that the most senior Pentagon official behind the cover-up was none other than five-star General and Army Chief of Staff, Dwight D. Eisenhower. General Eisenhower and Roswell flying saucer crash. Eisenhower was appointed U.S. Army Chief of Staff on November 19, 1945, and oversaw the demobilization of millions of soldiers. As the Supreme Commander of Allied forces in Europe and the first governor of occupied Germany, before returning to Washington in November 1945, he was deeply familiar with the cover effort to repatriate German scientists and technologies in Operation Paperclip 64. 2 years after the end of hostilities in Europe, Eisenhower would certainly have been piqued by reports out of Roswell Army Airfield about a flying saucer crash. Did it involve covert Nazi technologies that the Army was developing? Or could the incident have involved a genuine interplanetary craft? Leaked documents and witnesses reveal that Eisenhower played a leading role in decisions being made at the time about the UFO crash at Roswell. Two documents in particular reveal that he was among the first senior military officials to learn about the Roswell crash. Eisenhower gave orders for Nathan Twining, the commanding general at the Air Materiel Command, Wright AAF, later renamed Wright-Patterson AFB, to travel to Alamogordo Army Airfield, later renamed Holloman AFB, and from there write a report of the Roswell crash. An almost identical directive by President Truman suggests General Eisenhower was authorized by the president to play a leading role in the cover Army operation concerning the Roswell crash. Figure 7. General of the Army Dwight D. Eisenhower in 1947, source, Eisenhower Presidential Library. The first document in question was a directive from General Eisenhower to General Nathan Twining on July 8 regarding the events at Roswell. Eisenhower ordered Twining to travel to White Sands Missile Base to make an appraisal of the reported unidentified objects being kept there. 65 White Sands was where the former Nazi scientists, who were specialists in rocket technology, and therefore best able to evaluate the retrieved object, were located. Twining was also directed to deal with the military, political and psychological situations, current and projected surrounding the object. 66 In an almost identical directive to Twining, signed by President Truman on July 9, Truman asked that Twining communicate with General Eisenhower to ascertain whether he desires you to proceed via Kirtland AAF. 67 Truman's directive outlined the leading role Eisenhower would take on the Roswell crash. In response to the Truman directive, 1 week later, Twining released an air accident report to Army Air Force Headquarters 68. He reported that as far as aviation experts could determine, the disc was not created by the U.S. or any other country. How legitimate are the Twining directives by Eisenhower and Truman, and the air accident report by Twining? Dr. Robert Wood and his son Ryan, leading researchers of leaked documents allegedly dealing with extraterrestrial life and technologies, found sufficient evidence to conclude that the two directives and air accident report are genuine. 69 Before discussing the legitimacy of these two allegedly classified documents, I want to introduce another allegedly classified document, a report about the Roswell crash that mentions an informal briefing received by Congressman Kennedy. The claimed briefing is important since it reveals that Kennedy learned about the Roswell crash, and this was known to restricted readership of the classified report. Significantly for what will be revealed later in this book, Eisenhower was aware that Kennedy had been briefed about the crash, for Eisenhower was among the readers of the report. John F. Kennedy had been elected in November 1946 to the 11% congressional district of the U.S. House of Representatives. His father, Joseph Kennedy, a wealthy businessman who had been the U.S. ambassador to the United Kingdom 1937 to 1940, had high expectations for his sons. After the tragic death of his older brother, Joseph Jr., during World War II, John Fitzgerald had his father's high expectations pinned on him. As a returned war hero with his father's wealth and influence backing his candidacy, Kennedy won his first election in a constituency dominated by working-class Irish Americans. With his father's influence and networks, Kennedy was given sought-after committee assignments in his first congressional term. These assignments would give him a platform for far more ambitious political goals later in his career. When on the morning of July 9, Kennedy awoke to newspaper reports of conflicting Army press statements about the Roswell crash, he was in a position to use his congressional resources and political networks to find out what had really happened. With his naval intelligence background, Kennedy could immediately recognize something strange was happening with the conflicting press reports. Where there's smoke, there's fire. One of three things may have happened. Using his congressional networks and military contacts, Kennedy could have made discreet inquiries and taken into confidence by those in the loop regarding the events at Roswell. F. Kennedy. Source: JFK Presidential Library. Alternatively, because powerful figures recognize that Kennedy was destined to advance far in Washington, D.C., someone may have decided to cultivate the freshman congressman by briefing him about the most important event imaginable, an encounter with technologically evolved life from another planet. The most likely figure wanting to recruit Kennedy would have been Secretary of the Navy, James Forrestal. As mentioned earlier, he had tried unsuccessfully to recruit Kennedy for his personal staff in 1945. Did Forrestal now want to recruit Congressman Kennedy for another purpose? The third possibility is that Kennedy was identified as someone who could be relied upon in Congress to assist in passing legislation supporting cover policies being developed on extraterrestrial life. His background in naval intelligence had exposed him to the importance of maintaining security oaths and classification. Kennedy knew how to keep a secret and could play a valuable role in the unfolding cover-up of extraterrestrial life and technology. Through confidential congressional and military sources, Kennedy could learn much more than was revealed to the public about the Roswell flying saucer incident and why the Army had issued conflicting media releases. The key question that arises is, did Kennedy receive an informal briefing about the Roswell crash? According to an allegedly leaked military document, yes. In a classified report by an elite Army counterintelligence team, Kennedy is mentioned as having received an informal briefing about the Roswell crash. The Counterintelligence Corps 6/Interplanetary Phenomenon Unit report dated July 22, 1947, states, it has become known to CIC that some of the recovery operation was shared with Representative John F. Kennedy, Massachusetts Democrat elected to Congress in 46. Son of Joseph P. Kennedy, Commission on Organization for the Executive Branch of the Government. Kennedy had limited duty as naval officer assigned to naval intelligence during war. It is believed that information was obtained from source in Congress who is close to Secretary for Air Force 70. The reference to Kennedy is highly significant and revealing. The Interplanetary Phenomenon Unit report was intended for a very limited audience. It was a detailed summary of an investigation of what occurred at Roswell, as would have been expected if the original Army press release of an alien crash was correct. The Interplanetary Phenomenon Unit report states that Kennedy is a serving U.S. congressman, the son of a highly influential politician, Joseph Kennedy, and served in U.S. Navy intelligence. Basically, the report is telling its classified audience that Kennedy was someone who could be trusted to keep it all secret. 4.6.8 File Corey War Depart AE, Sherry ACOGTS Domlatia Ursa BSDD2C, 22 Arena Ryasi Igale Samar AOZOA WPT Tatted as add degree equals ATTA SD1, MW Wigs, WLETWOLED Perch with Mast Success Fall Havixes. British Pound Degree YS0A Section 05 SCW Ardo Registered Signed to SMCS Liata APR Fed PSPS Denton and Point 9, with DRL of US, Majestic Teaslegence and Security by SAC Cordy Offla. Gener data forward in USA ignored by Aiden Dillion Mooto _ dat, Afirita ni Figure 9. Cover page showing IPU report. Allegedly reclassified in 1960. Source, Majestic Documents. Kennedy appeared to have been unofficially briefed about the Roswell UFO crash from an unnamed congressional source close to the Secretary for Air Force. At the time, Stuart Symington was Assistant Secretary of War for Air. Symington would become on September 18, 1947, the first secretary for the newly formed U.S. Air Force. 71 in his official capacity, Symington would have certainly been informed about the UFO crash near Roswell Army Airfield. Symington was a native of Massachusetts. According to credible sources, he was Kennedy's first choice as a running mate for the 1960 presidential election, but was ultimately dropped in favor of Lyndon Johnson. 72 It is possible that Symington's relationship with Kennedy began as a result of his arranging for Kennedy to receive an informal briefing that a flying saucer had indeed crashed and alien bodies recovered at the 1947 Roswell crash. It is possible that Kennedy's support of Symington as his preferred vice presidential running mate was returning an important favor by Symington 13 years earlier. In the Interplanetary Phenomenon Unit report, the Army Chief of Staff, General Eisenhower, is also mentioned as one of the officials who would personally witness what was retrieved from Roswell along with the remains from another nearby crash site. On July 7, Lt. General Nathan Twining arrived at Alamogordo AAF for a secret meeting with AAF Chief of Staff Spatz and to view recovered remains of craft. It is believed that Twining and staff is preparing a detailed report of both incidents and briefings later to follow. It is also the belief of SIC that General Eisenhower will see a showing of recoveries sometime in late August this year. 73 This passage is very revealing since it refers to the report that Twining was preparing in response to the Truman-Eisenhower directives. It also claims that Eisenhower would personally view what was retrieved at Roswell more than a month after the crash. Even though Eisenhower played a direct role in key decisions being made about the Roswell crash and its national security implications, he relied on subordinates such as Nathan Twining to brief him. Due to his busy schedule, commitments, and impending retirement in February 1948, Eisenhower was content to delegate responsibilities to Army officers he could trust rather than viewing the material immediately. At the time of the Roswell incident, Eisenhower was already preparing to leave the U.S. Army. The authenticity of the Interplanetary Phenomenon Unit summary is disputed. Yet we do know that the Interplanetary Phenomenon Unit, IPU, was a highly classified Army intelligence unit that did exist during the period in question. After initially denying its existence, the U.S. Air Force was eventually forced to acknowledge that the Interplanetary Phenomenon Unit did exist for a period of time. Documents released through the Freedom of Information Act, FOIA, confirmed the existence of this highly secretive investigatory group, despite the best efforts by Air Force officials to cast doubt on its existence. In May 1984, UFO researcher William Steinman sent a FOIA request to the Army Directorate of Counterintelligence. Steinman received a reply from a Lieutenant Colonel Lance R. Corneen. As you note in your letter, the so-called Interplanetary Phenomenon Unit, IPU, was disestablished and, as far as we are aware, all records, if any, were transferred to the Air Force in the late 1950s. The unit was formed as an in-house project purely as an interest item for the Assistant Chief of Staff for Intelligence. It was never a unit in the military sense, nor was it ever formally organized or reportable. It had no investigative function, mission, or authority, and may not even have had any formal records at all. It is only through institutional memory that any recollection exists of this unit. We are therefore unable to answer your questions as to the exact purpose of the unit, exactly when it was disestablished, or who was in command. This last would not apply in any case, as no one was in command. We have no records or documentation of any kind on this unit. 74 Cornine's letter did acknowledge that the IPU did exist, but downplayed its existence as merely an interest item that was never an operational Army unit of any kind. Nearly 3 years later, in March 1987, British researcher Timothy Good also sent a FOIA request to the U.S. Army's Directorate of Intelligence. Good received a reply from Colonel William Guild. Guild's letter not only confirmed the IPU's existence but also revealed that the IPU was operational at one time. Please be advised that the aforementioned Army unit was disestablished during the late 1950s and never reactivated. All records pertaining to this unit were surrendered to the U.S. Air Force Office of Special Investigations in conjunction with Operation Blue Book 75. So according to the Army's Directorate of Intelligence, the IPU did exist and was abolished in the late 1950s. No timeline is given for when it was active. According to a leaked military document cited earlier, the Interplanetary Phenomenon Unit was allegedly created in 1942 by orders of Army Chief of Staff George Marshall in response to the mysterious air raid over Los Angeles on February 24/25, 1942-76. The top secret memo dated March 5, 1942 was addressed to President Roosevelt and explained how the Navy had recovered an unidentified airplane of interplanetary origin. Marshall then ordered Army G2 to create a special intelligence unit to investigate the phenomenon. 77. According to Drive. Robert Wood and his son Ryan, the memo bears correct Office of Chief of Staff, AUX, file numbers and has Interplanetary Phenomenon Unit IPU, typed on it at a later time by a different typewriter. It is logical to believe that this is the order that sets up the IPU 78. While the top secret March 5, 1942, memo has not been confirmed by FOIA or the U.S. Army, it does give a plausible timeline for the creation and function of the Interplanetary Phenomenon Unit. After its creation in 1942 as a unit within the Army's G2 intelligence, we know that the Interplanetary Phenomenon Unit had been deactivated in the late 1950s by the Army's Directorate of Intelligence. If the Marshall Memo is genuine, the Interplanetary Phenomenon Unit had been a fully functional Army unit tasked to investigate events concerning interplanetary phenomena since 1942. Even if the Interplanetary Phenomenon Unit was a real Army investigatory unit attached to the Army's Directorate of Intelligence, is its alleged Roswell crash report genuine? Did the Interplanetary Phenomenon Unit conduct a secret investigation in conjunction with the Army's Counterintelligence Corps of Events at Roswell? The Hot Affidavit and the Interplanetary Phenomenon Unit report. There are good reasons for concluding the Interplanetary Phenomenon Unit report is genuine, and its reference to Kennedy being briefed about events at Roswell is accurate. We can examine some of Walter Haut's claims about the Roswell crash and the cover-up, and compare them to what the Interplanetary Phenomenon Unit report said about the crash. It is worth emphasizing that the Interplanetary Phenomenon Unit report was leaked to UFO researchers between 1993 to 1996, at least 6 years before Haut wrote his affidavit. There is high confidence among Roswell UFO researchers that Haut's testimony is a definitive account of key events that occurred during the Roswell crash. Therefore, consistencies between the Interplanetary Phenomenon Unit report and Haut's recollection of events would be strong evidence that the IPU report is a genuine government document. Haut's affidavit reveals that the conflicting Army press releases were done to both distract from and cover up a crash of an alien flying saucer at the second Roswell crash site. This is what the Interplanetary Phenomenon Unit had to say about the conflicting press reports and the second crash site, LZ2. To maintain secrecy of Site LZ2, the CO of Roswell was authorized to give a brief press release to local paper in which 8 inches AF HDQRS promptly denied rumors that the Army had flying saucers in their possession, which effectively killed press interest. 79. This is consistent with the sequence of events described by Haut in his affidavit. Also, the Interplanetary Phenomenon Unit report refers to 2 crash sites. The first, LZ1, was identified as the Mac Brazel Ranch. The second, LZ2, is where, according to the IPU report, the majority of structural detail of the craft's airframe, propulsion and navigation technology. As to the bodies recovered at LZ2, it appeared that none of the 5 crew members survived entry into our atmosphere due to unknown cause. 80. Again, this is consistent with Haut's claims that the second site was more sensitive and the public media had to be steered away by referring to LZ1. In the initial press report, the Interplanetary Phenomenon Unit report is also consistent with Haut's claim of seeing the remains of 2 alien bodies temporarily stored at the Roswell AAF. Another reason is that the affidavit confirms that alien bodies had been retrieved at the second crash site, which was closer to the town of Roswell. Jesse Marcel did not mention finding alien remains at the first crash site. It is therefore understandable why the Army would want to redirect media and public attention away from the LZ2 crash site to the debris field at Mac Brazel's ranch. The latter was further away and more difficult to reach for independent confirmation. The wreckage at Mac Brazel's ranch could be more easily dismissed as a weather balloon. Again, there is an important consistency here between the Interplanetary Phenomenon Unit report and the Haut affidavit. A fourth reason is that the Interplanetary Phenomenon Unit report's description of what was recovered from the first crash site refers to the recovery of 5 bodies in a damaged escape cylinder. 81. This is consistent with the claims Haut makes in his affidavit. I was permitted from a safe distance to first observe the object just recovered north of town. It was approx. 12 to 15 feet in length, not quite as wide, about 6 feet high, and more of an egg shape. Also from a distance, I was able to see a couple of bodies under a canvas tarpaulin. Only the heads extended beyond the covering, and I was not able to make out any features. 82 It appears that debris from the two crash sites revealed an unsuccessful attempt by aliens to escape harm from an impending crash in an escape pod. The consistencies between Hott's affidavit and the IPU report support the conclusion that the Interplanetary Phenomenon Unit report is an authentic classified government document leaked to the public. One can surmise then that the report's references to both General Eisenhower and Congressman Kennedy are substantially accurate. Eisenhower and Kennedy were briefed about the 1947 Roswell crash. It is not a great surprise that General Eisenhower played a leading role in the appointment of, and orders given to, key officials to oversee the recovery of debris and bodies from the Roswell crash. Eisenhower was revered by both civilians and the military for his role in World War II, and was one of only two actively serving five-star Army generals, the other being Douglas MacArthur. He was also Chief of Staff to the Department of War, official name of the Army before the formation of the Department of Defense. It is therefore unthinkable that something as important as an interplanetary crash could occur near a major Army facility without Eisenhower being briefed. What is surprising is that Congressman John F. Kennedy also received a briefing. As a freshman congressman, Kennedy would not have been in a position to pursue what he may have learned informally through his sources about the Roswell crash. His initial interest and briefing regarding the flying saucer issue would have made clear to him that it was being handled at the highest classification level by the Truman administration and the national security system. Kennedy's friendship with Secretary Forrestal would have given him access to information that few others in Washington, D.C. could hope to gain. Nevertheless, Kennedy would likely have realized the need to proceed cautiously despite his connections and family influence. It is reasonable to presume the congressional and military sources that had informally briefed Kennedy about Roswell would have kept him apprised of how the extraterrestrial issue was being handled by the national security apparatus. Kennedy would have concluded from his naval intelligence background, 1945 post-war Europe tour with Secretary Forrestal, and what he had been informally told, that a strict policy of secrecy was being maintained. The general public, the mass media, and many of Kennedy's congressional peers were being told that there was nothing to the flying saucer issue. From his own intelligence background and military connections, Kennedy likely realized that a psychological warfare program was underway to keep the flying saucer secret from breaking out. As Kennedy rose in seniority through the congressional ranks, he would be able to learn more about what he must have known was one of the most highly classified secrets in the USA. In conclusion, first-hand whistleblower testimonies clarify many issues surrounding the Roswell crash. These testimonies help create a timeline of key events and personnel that can be used as a benchmark for validating the authenticity of allegedly leaked classified documents. In particular, the testimony of Walter Haut, written in an affidavit published posthumously, helps corroborate many of the key events described in documents such as the Interplanetary Phenomenon Unit report and the Eisenhower and Twining directives. It is reasonable to conclude the information in these documents is an accurate summation of events as they took place back in 1947. Key among these events for the purposes of this book is that two future presidents, General Eisenhower and Congressman Kennedy, were both briefed about the Roswell crash. The whistleblower testimonies and leaked documents clearly demonstrate that out of concern for national security, a policy of deception was implemented. This deception involved senior national security officials from different branches of government, including the then Chief of Army Staff, General Eisenhower, President Truman. It continues to this day. As a freshman congressman from Massachusetts, Kennedy was certainly in no position to exercise a major influence on national security policy on extraterrestrial life. At best, Kennedy may have been able to influence congressional legislation involving cover activities implemented by senior national security officials. If Kennedy learned about what really happened at Roswell, he would have to bide his time to have a chance to significantly influence national security policy on UFOs, and let the world know the truth about their extraterrestrial origins. Kennedy's time would come 13 years later after he was elected president on November 8, 1960. He would privately meet President Eisenhower on several occasions to discuss transition issues between the incoming and outgoing administrations. Eisenhower would recall or be reminded that Kennedy had been briefed about the Roswell crash. It is reasonable to conclude that the highly classified topic of alien life would have been discussed. Especially so if President Eisenhower had anything important to share about how alien-related projects were being covertly run in his administration. It is probable General Eisenhower personally viewed the Roswell wreckage in late August 1947, as mentioned in the Interplanetary Phenomenon Unit report. 6 months later, he would officially retire from Army life to become president of Columbia University. It would be 5 years later, after winning the 1952 presidential election, that the Roswell crash and associated events would again demand Eisenhower's attention. Chapter 3 President Eisenhower, MJ-12, S4 in the military-industrial complex. Dwight Eisenhower's landslide win in the presidential election of November 5, 1952, was not only a personal triumph, but also a return to power for the Republican Party. The Republicans had been out of the White House since the end of the Hoover administration on March 4, 1933. It was a long time in the political wilderness, but they had found their Moses to lead them to the promised land. The Republicans now had their man in the White House. The age of big government inaugurated by President Roosevelt was to be gradually turned back. Now corporate America would play a larger role in how the U.S. was run. This was especially the case for how the U.S. was to manage its most sensitive national security projects. The influence and resources of major corporations took on a prominent role. Eisenhower turned to a scion of corporate America to restructure the U.S. bureaucracy and its national security apparatus. Nelson Rockefeller, third son of American oil magnate John Rockefeller, was tasked by Eisenhower with restructuring the U.S. government. Among the things Rockefeller changed was how the office of the president was to manage the nation's biggest secret, the existence of extraterrestrial life and technology. On November 18, 1952, 2 weeks after winning office, President-elect Eisenhower flew into Washington, D.C. to receive a number of classified briefings. One dealt with a secret which Wilbert Smith, a senior official in the Canadian government, described as more highly classified than the H-bomb 83. The briefing dealt with select information about UFOs and extraterrestrial life. The Eisenhower briefing document, an 8-page document leaked in 1984, has been closely examined by various UFO researchers. 84 Stanton Friedman, a former nuclear physicist, received grants from the Fund for UFO Research to study the Eisenhower briefing document along with other allegedly leaked documents dealing with UFOs and extraterrestrial life. Friedman's task was to find out if the Eisenhower briefing document was genuine, or, as many suspected, a forged document designed to fool UFO researchers into chasing red herrings. Friedman discovered, to his surprise, that many of the details in the Eisenhower briefing were accurate. The dates, names, and circumstances were consistent with the historical facts. For example, a key date was September 24, 1947, when President Truman signed a memo to the Secretary of Defense James Forrestal authorizing the creation of Operation Majestic 12. Truman stated that the program would be run by the President's office after discussions between Forrestal, Drive, Vannevar Bush, Director of the Office of Scientific Research and Development, and the Director of Central Intelligence. Friedman discovered that in the 7-month period between May and December 1947, President Truman only met with Vannevar Bush once, on September 24, 85. Significantly, Bush was accompanied by Secretary Forrestal at the meeting. This was a stunning corroboration supporting the authenticity of both the Truman memo and the Eisenhower briefing document that included the former as Appendix A-86. Top Secret Eyes Only. The White House, Washington, September 2 B. 1947. Memorandum for the Secretary of Defense. F. Dear Secretary Forrestal, as per our recent conversation on this matter, you are hereby authorized to proceed with all due speed and caution upon your undertaking. Hereafter this matter shall be referred to only as Operation Majestic 12. It continues to be my feeling that any future considerations relative to the ultimate disposition of this matter should rest solely with the office of the President following appropriate discussions with yourself, Drive, Bush, and the Director of Central Intelligence. Figure 10. Truman Memo. Source: Majestic Documents. Friedman found there was no clear evidence to suggest that the Eisenhower briefing document and the Truman Memo were forged documents. In fact, there was good evidence to suggest the contrary. Both appeared to be genuine. In his eventual book announcing the results of his research, he concluded, surprisingly, nothing that we had found or that others had alleged indicated that the documents were anything other than legitimate. 87. The emergence of the Eisenhower briefing document in 1984 came 4 years after the publication of a book written by William Moore and Charles Berlitz titled The Roswell Incident. 88. It contained the stunning testimony of Jesse Marcel and other primary witnesses of the Roswell crash. For Friedman and other researchers fresh from learning about Roswell, the Eisenhower briefing document was the Rosetta Stone for understanding much of the UFO phenomenon. The Eisenhower briefing document named the principal military and scientific figures involved with the UFO extraterrestrial issue. It identified the main organization set up to manage the issue, the MJ-12 MJ-12 or MJ-12 group, comprising some of the most powerful figures in the U.S. national security apparatus. MJ-12 would report directly to the Office of the President. Operation MJ-12 is a top-secret research and development intelligence operation responsible directly and only to the President of the United States. Operations of the project are carried out under the control of the MJ-12 MJ-12 group, which was established by Special Classified Executive Order of President Truman on September 24, 1947, upon recommendation by Drive. Vannevar Bush and Secretary James Forrestal. See Attachment A. Members of the MJ-12 group were designated as follows. See following figure. 89. Friedman's groundbreaking study of the Eisenhower briefing document uncovered a wealth of evidence that corroborated the existence of MJ-12 MJ-12 group and its members. Top secret MJ-X's, OLY top secret EISENHOWER only copy 1 of K. Subject, Operation MJ-12 preliminary briefing for President LCT Eisenhower. Document prepared November 18, 1952. Briefing of EISENHOWER, ADM. Roscoe's H. Illencoater, trademark sign J1. Note, this document has been prepared as a preliminary briefing. It should be regarded AO introductory to a full operations on briefing intended to follow. Operation MJ-12 is a top sport research and development / intelligence operation responsible directly and only to the President of the United States. Operations of the WES are carried out under control of the MJ-12 MJ-12 group, which was established by Special Classified Executive Order of President Truman on September 24, 1947, upon recommendation by Dr. Vannevar Bush and Secretary James Forrestal. See Attachment A. Members of the MJ-12 group were designated as follower. ADM, Roscoe H. Illencoater Ray, Dr. Donald Menzel Gen. Robert M. Montague, Dr. Lloyd Japanese Yen Berkner. The death of Secretary Forrestal on May 22, 1949, created a vacancy which remained unfilled until August 1, 1950, upon which date Gen. Walter B. Smith was designated as permanent replacement. EVR Crete, Top Sect Y MJ-Eyes only Phys only T52 exempt, 8, Figure 11. Eisenhower briefing document, P2. Majestic Documents No. 2. Fig. 12. MJ-12 Group, 1947 to 1949, MJ1. ADM Roscoe Illencoater M4J-2. Dr. Vannevar Bush MJ3. Sec. James Forrestal MJ7. Dr. Jerome Hunsaker MD8. ADM Sidney Sowers MJ9. Gordon Gray MJ10. Dr. Donald Menzel MJ11. Gen. Robert Montague MJ12. Dr. Lloyd Berkner. And as far as the names are concerned, Friedman found that the 12 figures involved were eminently suited for a committee that would run the entire UFO extraterrestrial phenomenon. Interestingly, the Eisenhower briefing was released only 3 months after the last surviving member of the group, Dr. Jerome Hunsaker, had died September 10, 1984. This hints at some prior agreement over the public release of such information. The members of the MJ-12 group represented a cross-section of the military, scientific, and intelligence communities. After conducting a detailed analysis of each of those named in the Eisenhower briefing document, Friedman concluded there were close links within this group of very important people. Considering what was happening in America and around the world post-World War II, they were a natural group to be on a committee such as MJ-12. Either by aptitude, position, or geographic location, their inclusion would be fairly obvious. 90. The head of MJ-12 group was the Director of Central Intelligence, Admiral Roscoe Illencoater. This is important to keep in mind as we uncover evidence of the leading role the CIA would play in the future with Operation MJ-12. Official government documents supporting the existence of the MJ-12 group. Friedman eventually found startling corroboration for the existence of MJ-12, a document sitting in the National Archives called the Cutler-Twining Memo, issued on July 14, 1954. It was a top-secret memorandum for General Nathan Twining, a member of MJ-12, from Robert Cutler, who was a special assistant to President Eisenhower. The memo stated, "The President has decided that the MJ-12's briefing should take place during the already scheduled White House meeting of July 16, rather than following it as previously intended." 91. The subject line of the memorandum states ENSC/MJ-12 Special Studies Project. Unlike other majestic documents, the Cutler-Twining memo was an official government document housed at the National Archives that had been declassified from top secret. It was found among a group of declassified Air Force documents and copied by the archivist, Ed Reese, as part of official records belonging to the National Archives. 92 The Cutler-Twining Memo is among the most authoritative documentary sources so far to prove the existence of an MJ-12 Special Studies project. 93 Friedman succeeded in finding a government document that corroborated one of the key facts revealed by the Eisenhower briefing document. A secret organization that dealt with highly sensitive national security information existed, and its name was MJ-12. There is further official documentation supporting the existence of a highly classified control group dealing with UFOs, flying saucers. In Chapter 2, I mentioned the top-secret memo from Wilbert Smith to the Canadian Department of Transportation on November 21, 1951. Smith had officially reported to the Controller of Telecommunications concerning flying saucer technologies being secretly studied in the U.S. by a small group headed by Drive Vannevar Bush. 94 Smith's memo confirms that, in 1951, a small group headed by Dr. Vannevar Bush was secretly studying the technologies associated with the UFO issue. Bush had earlier headed the Office of Scientific Research and Development, 1941 to 1947, and the Joint Military Services Research Development Board, RDB 95 at the time of Smith's memo. Bush was on the Oversight Committee of the RDB and a leading scientific advisor to Truman. Malley 14 19% Mior 2FO GE Galtwire. The President has noted that should the 0 to 12s briefing take place, the scheduled tid means beating intended, or precise arrangements mied to accordingly. Your concurrence in the above change of arrangement. Special Assistant to the President RFOO. The National Archives Record RS Bess. 9 No, BOS 41, Rixardia sent to 5.2I, Bad Quarters United Norco Figure 13. Cutler-Twining Memo. Source: Majestic Documents. The final documentation to prove the existence of a highly classified project called MJ-12 involves 1952 top-secret memos from the Joint Chiefs of Staff titled, Joint Logistic Plan for Majestic. The memos were declassified in 1976 and state the following plans in support of Majestic are now under preparation: a psychological warfare plan, an unconventional warfare plan, cover and deception plans, a civil affairs military government plan, a command plan, a logistic plan, transportation guidance, to be included in the logistic plan, a map and chart plan, and a communications plan. 96 These memos show that in 1952, a project called Majestic was underway, and this involved significant support across a wide spectrum of issues, as would be expected for something involving UFOs and extraterrestrial life. The Joint Chiefs memos corroborate the 1954 Cutler-Twining memo, and Smith's memo referring to a small group headed by Vannevar Bush. Taken collectively, the Cutler-Twining memo, the Smith memo, and the Joint Chiefs of Staff memos conclusively show that a top-secret military scientific group responsible for dealing with extraterrestrial life and technology called at the time MJ-12 Group, Special Studies Project, or some variation, did in fact exist. These documents reveal that MJ-12 operated in a highly classified manner on the subject of flying saucers, worked within the UNSC system implemented by President Truman, and was given enormous logistical support by the Pentagon. These official government documents authenticate the Eisenhower briefing document and the Truman memo. Eisenhower's response to his classified UFO briefing. We have no historical record of the President-elect's response to the briefing described in the Eisenhower briefing document. As a former five-star general, Supreme Commander of Allied Forces in Europe, and Army Chief of Staff, Eisenhower would predictably have received briefings when key historic incidents in the document had occurred. In particular, as Army Chief of Staff, 1945 to 1948, at the time of the 1947 Roswell UFO incident, Eisenhower would have been intimately familiar with the circumstances of the crash and the national security reasons for the cover-up. As discussed in the previous chapter, not only was Eisenhower briefed, but he played a key role in the appointment of officials and events that culminated in the cover-up of the Roswell crash. By November 1952, however, Eisenhower had been out of the military for 6 months and was serving full-time as president of Columbia University. The events and circumstances detailed in the Eisenhower briefing document required long-term thinking on the part of the incoming president. Eisenhower knew that the key to any successful military operation was to conduct a strategic study of one's resources, personnel and capabilities in order to meet future contingencies. The U.S. government had a vast bureaucracy and had to deal with the ultimate national security contingency in total secrecy, the existence of technologically developed visitors from other worlds. Eisenhower was to appoint a trusted figure to come up with a strategic plan for how to best reorganize the U.S. bureaucracy to meet future contingencies. That man was Nelson Rockefeller. On January 24, 1953, by Executive Order 10,432, President Eisenhower established the Advisory Committee on Government Organization, whose primary goal was to reorganize the U.S. federal government. 97 Eisenhower nominated Nelson Rockefeller to chair the committee that would directly report to the president with its recommendations for final approval. Rockefeller was chairman from 195,359 and was therefore the person to whom the president would turn for the committee's recommendations on how best to reorganize the U.S. government. After Rockefeller passed on the committee's recommendations, they would be implemented by different federal departments and agencies in the manner Eisenhower decided was most appropriate. As chairman of the committee, Rockefeller was in a position to greatly influence the final recommendations that would be put to President Eisenhower and how these could be implemented. Among the recommendations that Rockefeller passed on to Eisenhower was how to reorganize the national security apparatus to accommodate the activities and goals of MJ-12. Rockefeller's final recommendation was to more deeply hide the majestic 12 Committee in the shadowy world of cover operations, a world in which he now played a key role on behalf of the Eisenhower administration. In addition to his role in chairing the President's Advisory Committee on Government Organization, in 1954 Rockefeller was appointed Special Assistant for Cold War Planning by Eisenhower. The latter position officially involved the monitoring and approval of covert CIA operations. 98 Rockefeller therefore worked directly with the Cover Operations Division of the CIA, the Directorate of Plans that was then headed by Frank Wisner. In January 1959, the Directorate of Plans would be taken over by Richard Bissell, who, we will see, was instrumental in the acquisition and development of Area 51 in 1955. In working with the CIA's black operations, Rockefeller found a suitable vehicle through which the majestic 12 MJ-12 group could conduct its business in complete secrecy without interference from ambitious politicians, or, ultimately, as we will see, President Eisenhower himself. Rockefeller ensured that MJ-12 would now have greater autonomy from the office of the president in order to immunize MJ-12 and the classified projects it ran from the uncertainties of the American political process. It made little sense to subject U.S. national security, in its ultimate quest to develop a long-term strategic answer to extraterrestrial visitors, to the short-term contingencies of politicians periodically consumed with the need to be re-elected. MJ-12 had to have its autonomy. This required removing it from direct oversight by the office of the president, so went the argument. Eisenhower, to his ultimate regret, would agree with this flawed argument put to him in one of Rockefeller's recommendations for government reorganization. Under the Eisenhower administration, a major base of MJ-12 operations was Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Wright-Patterson, previous called Wright Army Airfield, was the location where the 1947 Roswell crash material was taken for study. The remains of other UFO crashes, as mentioned in the Eisenhower briefing document, would also be taken to Wright-Patterson. Cover operations out of Wright-Patterson AFB offered both advantages and disadvantages for MJ-12. A key advantage was that some of the world's best aviation engineers worked out of Wright-Patterson. They were more than capable of reverse engineering advanced technologies retrieved from foreign powers, as they had done during World War II with captured Nazi jet fighters. MJ-12 meetings at Wright-Patterson offered the opportunity to directly study the technologies and entities recovered from crashes with the Air Force's top engineers and scientists. A little-known non-governmental agency called the Battle Institute, situated near Wright-Patterson AFB, would offer a suitable venue for MJ-12 meetings. 99 The major disadvantage of Wright-Patterson was that it was an Air Force installation firmly under the control of Pentagon, and ultimately the President. Where would MJ-12 establish its ultimate base of operations, away from the prying eyes of the presidency, and from the military services that competed for control over various aspects of the UFO extraterrestrial phenomenon? It would be a remote part of the Nevada desert owned at the time by the Department of Energy. The CIA and Area 51. A CIA document that was declassified and released on June 25, 2013 confirms that in 1955 a remote section of the Nevada testing facility was handed over to the control of the CIA. Titled the Central Intelligence Agency and Overhead Reconnaissance, the U-2 and Oxguard programs, 1954 to 1974, the document for the first time officially acknowledged the existence of Area 51-100. According to the CIA document, Area 51 was ideal for the development and testing of secret spy planes that could be used against the Soviet Union. The area was adjacent to a dry desert bed called Groom Lake, where an unusually long runway could be built along with the necessary underground research and development facilities. Richard Bissell, then working under Frank Wisner in the CIA's Cover Operations Division, was put in charge of the acquisition of Area 51. On April 12, 1955, Richard Bissell and Col. Osmond Ritland, the senior Air Force officer on the project staff, flew over Nevada with Kelly Johnson in a small Beechcraft plane piloted by Lockheed's chief test pilot, Tony Levier. They spotted what appeared to be an airstrip by a salt flat known as Groom Lake, near the northeast corner of the Atomic Energy Commission's Nevada Proving Ground. Bissell and his colleagues all agreed that Groom Lake would make an ideal site for testing the U-2 and training its pilots. 101 The CIA's acquisition of Area 51 from the Department of Energy was signed off by President Eisenhower himself. 102 Over the next decades, some of the most advanced aviation programs would be developed at the facility built near Groom Lake at Area 51 with the assistance of aeronautical companies such as Lockheed. According to the declassified document, the CIA would have ultimate responsibility for ensuring security at Area 51. On April 29, 1955, Richard Bissell signed an agreement with the Air Force and the Navy, which at that time was also interested in the U-2, in which the services agreed that the CIA assumed primary responsibility for all security for the Overhead Reconnaissance Project, Aquatone. From this time on, the CIA has been responsible for the security of overhead programs 103. This is worth emphasizing since it means that whatever facilities were built at Area 51, it would be the CIA that had primary responsibility over who gained access or was given a briefing. Neither the U.S. Air Force nor the Navy would ultimately be in control of the classified projects happening at Area 51. It would be the CIA. This is surprising given that the military services had vast resources and a history in handling advanced technologies acquired by the U.S. As mentioned earlier, Nazi jet fighters and other advanced weapons were taken to military facilities such as Wright Army Airfield, aka Wright-Patterson AFB, for study and reverse engineering during World War I. The CIA was a brand new government agency created only in 1947. Clearly, the MJ-12 group believed the CIA offered important advantages, among which was that it would certainly pose fewer institutional obstacles to how MJ-12 wanted to run its projects. The CIA's Directorate of Plans, Cover Operations, headed by Frank Wisner, 1951 to 1958, and later Richard Bissell, 1959 to 1962, would play critical roles in the future security of Area 51 facilities. More important would be their respective roles in acquiring extraterrestrial technologies found anywhere in the world for final relocation to Area 51. This would require great coordination and cooperation among different military and intelligence services around the world. While the Directorate of Plans would have the personnel and resources to covertly relocate extraterrestrial technologies, it would be up the CIA's Counterintelligence Division to ensure this was done without any leaks. It was the Counterintelligence Division's job to monitor CIA spies and cover operatives to ensure they had not been compromised by foreign intelligence agencies. The CIA-CI division was run by James Jesus Angleton from 1954 to 1975. Angleton was a protege of then-serving CIA Director Allen Dulles, 1953 to 1961, who, it will be later revealed, also headed MJ-12 at the time Area 51 became operational. It appears that the MJ-12 group had adopted a protocol that the serving CIA director would be appointed to head MJ-12. Gagoon Lake Papoose Lake Figure 14. Area 51 with S4 facility. What the declassified CIA document does not mention is the building of a second, even more highly classified, facility at Area 51. This second facility was built next to Papoose Lake, on the southern side of the Papoose mountain range, approximately 10 miles southwest of Groom Lake. It is worth repeating that it would be the CIA, more specifically, its Directorate of Plans and Counterintelligence Divisions, that was in charge of security for this even more secretive facility at Papoose Lake. This second facility was to be MJ-12's ultimate base of operations, and MJ-12 would use the CIA as its proxy for controlling what would be called S4. Whistleblower testimonies about S4. Information about the S4 facility has been revealed by a number of whistleblowers. While controversy surrounds each of the whistleblowers concerning documentation to substantiate their testimonies, to date these are the only eyewitness accounts of the mysterious S4 facility. Space does not allow an exhaustive analysis of their credibility as witnesses, and the controversy surrounding each. It's worth pointing out that it is illegal to reveal information or documents about a classified U.S. facility or program that has not been acknowledged to officially exist. Here is how the Pentagon describes unacknowledged special access programs, SAPs. Unacknowledged SAPs require a significantly greater degree of protection than acknowledged SAPs. A SAP with protective controls that ensures the existence of the program is not acknowledged, affirmed, or made known to any person not authorized for such information. All aspects, e.g., technical, operational, logistical, etc., are handled in an unacknowledged manner. 104 It could be expected that there would be little, if any, official documentation that could be found to substantiate whistleblower claims of working at such a classified facility. Consequently, I will briefly summarize each of their testimonies and give references for the reader to further research their claims and the controversy over their credibility. The first and most famous of the whistleblowers is Robert Lazar, who, in November 1989, went public with his experiences at the highly classified S4 facility. Lazar described a facility housing 9 different flying saucer-type craft using incredibly advanced propulsion and navigation technologies. He was asked to participate in an attempt to reverse engineer one of the propulsion systems. Lazar claims that the advanced vehicles were regularly tested on a particular night and hour. Sure enough, at the scheduled time, Lazar and several associates witnessed the flying saucer craft being tested over Area 51. One of the propulsion systems identified by Lazar involved the breaking apart of a stable isotope of element 115 in a manner that generated antimatter which could then be used to power the spacecraft. Lazar even claims that he briefly sighted an extraterrestrial at S4, suggesting that the Papoose Lake facility handled both extraterrestrial life and technologies. While Lazar's testimony has been hotly debated, recent scientific advances lend credibility to his claims. 105 For example, it has been confirmed that element 115 does exist, and was added to the periodic table as an Pentium 106 also. Lazar took several UFO researchers and a Japanese film crew to monitor secret testing of the flying saucer technologies from vantage points on State Route 375 renamed Extraterrestrial Highway in 1996, adjacent to Area 51.1107. The craft were witnessed and captured on film, confirming Lazar's direct knowledge of the testing schedule of craft out of Area 51. 2 years after Lazar introduced the world to Area 51 and S4, Derek Hennessy, aka Connor Orion, approached famed UFO researcher Wendell Stevens, LT Call, USAF Ret. With his own S4 story in 1991. 108 Hennessy claims to have been a former Navy SEAL recruited to work in the classified world of UFO extraterrestrial projects based at S4. He said that part of his work involved the assassination of individuals who were deemed by MJ-12 to be national security threats. During the cooling down period after his assignments, he would be taken to S4 to work as a security guard before being given a new assignment. He says he witnessed VIPs such as then Defense Secretary Dick Cheney visit the S4 facility and directly observe the different spacecraft and alien bodies. 109 Eventually, Hennessy attempted to leave the program when he suspected he was himself targeted for elimination. After he contacted Stevens in 1991, he went for a short period into hiding at a remote location provided by Stevens. Hennessy gave extensive interviews to Stevens and other UFO researchers, and recorded 6 hours of video testimony of his work for MJ-12 and what he saw at S4. 110 Another S4 whistleblower was Steve Wilson, who claimed to be a retired Air Force LT colonel who worked on a highly classified program called Project Pounce. This was allegedly an inter-services program aimed at locating, securing and retrieving downed UFOs from around the world. According to Wilson, alien crafts would be taken to S4 for further study, not the Groom Lake facility. This is how he described his first visit to S4, according to UFO researcher Drive. Richard Boylan, the plane circled and set down on a dry lake bed. Later he learned it was Papoose Dry Lake S4, deep within the Nellis Air Force Range in central Nevada. Even up close, the mountains and terrain looked barren. They walked about 300 yards to a rock outcropping. On the other side, nestled between some large rocks, was an iron door with no handle. The scruffy-looking CIA man somehow opened the door. They went inside and down a tunnel. At the end of the passageway, Wilson glanced around quickly. He still marvels at the size